advanced technology in the universities all across New York State. And the CATs also work very closely with both New York State and corporations from around the world to do joint technology ventures or technology research. So that's the main job. We also work with the RTDCs, which a lot of the other end of the corporate spectrum. They work with a lot of the small businesses throughout the state, the regional technology development corporations. They help small companies do labor, help run funding and the like. I think a lot of folks know about those. And then lastly is sort of the rounding error, the 30-year-old evergreen fund, the Small Business Technology Investment Fund. We have about 40 companies in our portfolio. We also have invested in 2 seed funds, one of which is the one here in Western New York called the Western New York Business Development Fund, of which a number of the companies that presented today are part of that portfolio, and also another in New York City. New York State-based technology companies from Sag Harbor to Buffalo. And we co-invest with angels and other VCs throughout the state. And with that experience, they've asked me to introduce true warrior entrepreneurs. Here on my left, our friends to my left will be George Adams, and each will give an explanation of who they want you to believe they are, so they can give the details. And Ron Schreiber, who we worked together back in the day, the .com world, and Christina Whitman. And we're going to talk about what they feel that makes an entrepreneur, a warrior entrepreneur, and what are some of the things we can do now to make more. So, George, how would you like to share?
So my bio is in the program. I've done 5 companies. Each one's taken me about 4.5 to 5.5 years to take a piece of technology out of a university somewhere and turn it into something that I could sell to the company, either publicly traded, take it out and make it publicly traded, or sell it to a large corporation. So I've done it 5 times. So and I've just finished the last one 2 weeks ago. So those of you who are really paying attention notice that I changed my affiliation between the one program and the next program. So my last one was a publicly traded drug discovery and diagnostic company called Amorphix, which is on the TSX. And so I resigned as the CEO a couple of weeks ago from that company. I'd been there for almost 5.5 years, so I'd hit my best before date. So that's what I do. I also have, in my past, been a venture capitalist and funded companies, and I've sat on dozens of boards of directors, all of startup companies. So, and I am an angel investor.
No, we're good. Okay. Well, I think I want to be George. My name's Ron Schreiber. I'm a Buffalonian. I am a partner in SoftBank Capital, which is a $270 million venture capital firm. SoftBank has a legacy of a number of different funds that we've put together. This is now my 3rd with SoftBank. We currently have about 28 companies in the portfolio. Our typical investment is somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $5 million, with maybe a lifetime investment in each of the deals of up to $10 million, could be $15 million. I got to be in venture capital because I was fortunate enough to build a couple of businesses along the way. And venture capital firms like to have operating partners as investors because you can understand exactly the shoes that the places that you're trying to invest in are walking in. So it makes for a fairly good model. And if you start to track portfolio success, a good portion of the success comes from the partners that were operating executives that eventually got to be investors. The businesses that I was involved with, have actually good Buffalo roots, and I'm proud to say, because we put a lot of people to work here in Western New York. But the first one was a company that's today called Ingram Micro, which is a public company, and actually the largest wholesale distribution company in the world with about $30 billion in sales and operations in many, many countries. I was fortunate enough to ride the wave of the PC the PC industry, and I think that, if I am referred to as a serial entrepreneur, it's only because things happen to me serially, and I guess I was either lucky enough or astute enough to be able to see it when it was coming. But, growing up in the PC age and taking advantage of that wave was really something that was very interesting. And following Ingram Micro, which we sold in the late 80s, we started another company, myself and my partner, Jordan Levy, who is another Buffalo native. We started a company which was called UCA, Upgrade Corporation of America. And again, it was just, I'd say, just dumb luck that we found our way into the business. The idea was good, but the idea evolved like many businesses. Those people that are out here that are entrepreneurs or starting companies, your business will look different in 5 years than it looks today, or it probably has a good chance to look different. But the genesis of that business, if I just take a moment, was that in the distribution world where we were representing, we distributed all of the key companies in software, Microsoft, Apple, IBM, people like that. We noticed that they were doing software upgrades, and they were spending huge amounts of money in building large infrastructure in order to be able to conduct the upgrades, and it looked sort of silly. And we just happened to see this by accident, or I saw it by accident one fall. And we realized that if you gave them an option to outsource that activity, that you can probably end up doing it for Lotus, and you can do it for every other company. And we were successful in doing that. So we started what was the outsourcing of services for high-tech companies, and we were fortunate enough to have about 85% of the software world as our clients. That business has morphed over a series of acquisitions into what's today called Sitel Worldwide, which has about 70,000 employees in it, and well in excess of $1 billion worth of service-based revenue. That's sort of the operational stuff, and I've had, those are good successes. I've had some other successes. I had plenty of failures too, so it's all part of the scorekeeping. Fortunately, the track record that I was able to develop, as an entrepreneur was early enough to give me enough credibility to do the next deal. You only get to fail and get to fail with some integrity after you've had some success, So today, venture capital, the legacy of our firm, we were again fortunate enough to ride a wave of the internet. So SoftBank Capital invested in Yahoo and things like E-Trade and Intertrust and BackWeb, and some companies you won't recognize, but they were all billion-dollar exits. And we have been able to, continue to be what I think we like to think of as an upper-tier venture capital firm. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Whitman, and I'm from Rochester. So I'm representing the Rochester, a lot of folks from Rochester here, I see. I never really thought of myself as a warrior entrepreneur, but I have always said I was a serial entrepreneur by accident. I really did not plan to be in charge of a company, in fact, but was working in Rochester at a company that was involved in the semiconductor arena, and felt that we were missing the wave in Rochester where all the activity was out on the West Coast, and it had this crazy notion that I could buy the company from the owners, which we did, and put together a small team, and then we built that company from $10 million to $100 million run rate. We went through the same process that many of you are going through, where we looked for rounds of capital. We did a couple rounds of private equity, and then we took the company public in 2000, or 1999, I guess. And in 2000, we were acquired for about $400 million. That allowed us to have money to then reinvest, and we formed CSW Associates and created our own venture fund to look for early stage businesses that we could then invest in. And we have a portfolio of about 8 companies that we've invested in. All are doing okay, various levels. And I am running another operating company, Complimart Partners, partners, and that's in the outsourced services arena. And we have been acquiring businesses, so we've now got a company out on the West Coast. After we sold our last business, CVC, I came back to Rochester and realized that Rochester was struggling, and we created the Greater Rochester Enterprise, myself and a couple other guys. I had time to do that. And we also discovered that there was a shortage of any kind of organized angel investing, so we formed the Rochester Angel Network, and it is now thriving, and we've got a nice infrastructure in Rochester. I saw Jim Sinal here, and with High Tech of Rochester, and there's an incubator within RIT. So I'm excited to see the progress that is taking place in the Rochester area now. When I first became involved in raising funds in the early 90s, that was a very lonely place to look. So very excited to see what's going on here today. Thank you.
Just to give a definition of what we were given for a warrior entrepreneur, it's pretty much a successful entrepreneur. Innovating your technology or systems, creating a company with lots of employees, though nowadays with SaaS models, that's not necessarily part of the plan, and an exit strategy. Given that, and I guess given that you probably originally raised your money in a different environment, but are now helping money go out the door in an organized manner now. Can you give us some insights that would help both the entrepreneurs and also to manage the expectations of the angels here on the funding opportunities and challenges and maybe hurdles that you've experienced?
We can start.
No, let's start. Left, right? No, I want to ladies first and go the other direction.
Are you asking me first?
No, let's move along from George.
Okay. Right, so I come from Canada, and so we have a slightly different environment. And the most current one, Amorphix, was we wouldn't have been funded by a venture capitalist. Probably would have gotten some angel money for it. Didn't bother. So Dan Mothersill this morning said something about capital pool corporations. So in Canada, we have a unique structure called a capital pool corporation, which is a publicly traded shell, which is mandated to go find a business and do a reverse takeover. And so you get into a public listing by that mechanism. So we did that. There have been thousands of those public shells created. Some of them you have 18 to 24 months to find a company, and if you don't make it, then find a business that you reverse takeover. If you don't make it, then you get delisted, so you lose your money. And you've got to have, I forget what the number is, 500 shareholders or something. So you have it's more than family and friends. You got to have a bunch of people. But it works very well for creating companies. It was originally created to create mining companies and oil and gas companies and things like that. Some of you may know that 80% of the financing for mining companies comes from Canada. So if you set up a mining company in Africa, you come to Toronto or Vancouver and raise the money. That's what Canada does. It funds mining company. And so they just took that model and is available to any kind of company. So I did that. I did the reverse takeover, and then I did subsequent public rounds in the public markets, and went from a retail shareholder base to an institutional shareholder base, and raised about $25 million over the last 5 years to make that company go. So that's been a unique Canadian kind of environment. Now, you don't have to be a Canadian company to do that. You can be, and in fact, I've advised several American companies on how to do the reverse takeover and become listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. You can be an African company. Like I said, you can be anywhere. It doesn't matter. And just like a Canadian company can list on NASDAQ or list on the New York Stock Exchange or list on AIM or Frankfurt or Zurich or whatever. I mean, you can be any kind of a company and list on any exchange. You just have to follow the rules. So people want more information about how that works, I'd be happy to hand that out later. So that's probably a unique thing. I was asked to sort of talk about unique things, right? So that's my contribution in terms of unique.
I'd like to be granular about this. Is this on? I'd like to be a little granular about it so that, you know, maybe I can leave something of value, because many people in the audience are just at the very beginning, and they're trying to figure out, how do I get to a point where I even have enough scale, mass, or anything like that to do any of the stuff that George is talking about. In my particular case, what I would like to make sure you all know is that in our venture capital business, I don't mean a high percentage, I mean all. Every deal that we have done in our firm in the last 2 funds have been introduced by our firm by people that we know. Okay, you know, and we took a look at this, and it was like, what is a deal attribution? People that we know introduced the deals to our firm. And the more we trust them, the more we give time to that particular deal. You know, so how do you extrapolate something from that? If I rolled back and then thinking about coming to this event today, I was starting to think about, what did I do when I first started? You know, I didn't have a track record. If you have a track record, George has done a deal 5 times, you know, so obviously the 5th time, how hard is it for him to go out there and convince people that he can do it? You know, in the venture capital business, what we do is that we ride an entrepreneur, you know, and if an entrepreneur knows how to navigate their way to success, we know that that is a good bet. We're likely to bet on the person, you know, with almost any idea than, you know, an idea with a bad person. You know, and it's to such an extent where we have institutionalized this concept of entrepreneurs in residence. If you take a guy like George, who's a serial entrepreneur, who says, now I'm on the loose right now, what we do is say, come on into our firm, we'll give you an office, we'll even pay you. Do something, okay? We'd love to be able to invest in it, you know? But that's when you have a track record. What do you do when you're first getting going? You know, when I looked at the first deal that I did and I needed to go raise money, you know, I had no credibility. You know, I was working someplace and people knew me, so I guess I might have made some sense. But what I did was I had to go and borrow credibility, you know, and the credibility that I borrowed was that I went and I aligned myself with what I call a rainmaker lawyer, and that is one that has access to people and money. So that lawyer then is the one who's making the call to somebody and say, I got something interesting for you. So I needed to make one sale. You're always selling something. I needed to make one sale. I needed to convince a lawyer to put the effort in, you know, in order to give me access to the Rolodex. And I did the same thing with an accountant. So early on, I would sit there and say that if you don't have the credibility or the track record, what you need to do is rent it or borrow it, you know, and that means that you find great access in terms of professional help, lawyers and accountants, and you end up building an advisory board that ultimately ends up giving you the connections. Because what I will tell you again is that our firm is not unique in terms of the checks that we write are generally originated, or the attribution comes from people that we know. So you got to kind of play in that web.
I agree with exactly what you just said. In the early days when I first decided to put together a deal to acquire an existing business, I went out and networked. Today we have a lot of networking groups that you can get access to. Back then you just needed to know people who had money. And now we just have formalized groups of people who have money. But that is the way to get the first level of funds. And this is a series you're going to go through if you're just starting out. That it's best if you start out with a smaller amount of money, in my opinion, because you don't get yourself diluted right away. But, you know, you prove yourself, you can make your mistakes, your risks aren't so high, and then you go for another round. So in your first round, you get your friends who are willing to cut you some slack, too. And look for people who are somewhat benevolent, I would say, and willing to give you more time than you've committed to, because it always takes longer than you think. I used, and this is sort of a non-traditional way, but I had an international business, and I had a Japanese distributor who had access to very low interest money, and so he became one of my key investors, and that turned out to be a huge strategic advantage for me to penetrate the Japanese market. So you kind of have to tailor to the market that you're in. But then the next phase, I think, you want to amass yourself with an advisory board or a board of directors of people who have that credibility that Ron just mentioned, because that rented credibility goes a long way in getting you in the doors that you're trying to achieve. Also, I think you want to, once you've gotten yourself to the next level, you do want to hire some form of investment banker or advisor, or use a lawyer or an accountant who has really done a lot of deals before. Don't just go with your friend who's the lawyer who's cheap, or your friend who's the accountant who's going to do it for free. Get people who really know how to do deals. Night and day. And when we were ready to go around for a round of real money, you got to go to the money centers, I think. And there's a small number of local firms that you can use, but you have to try a lot of places to get your money, because there's so many deals being pitched to all these different firms that you can't just narrow it to local VC funds. We don't have a lot in upstate New York. So you got to get to where the money is. You got to go to Boston. You got to go to New York. For us in this part of the world, those are the two places, the money centers. Or, and I don't really know the Canadian market well enough to say, but I'm guessing it would be out of Toronto. Is that where? Vancouver, Toronto?
Well, we don't have Valley of Canada.
Well, Nepean, Ottawa, Silicon North, Ottawa. If you're doing IT stuff, yes,
yeah.
I mean that's where Nortel was, and I always like to say the story. The best way to make a cluster is to have an international company grow, and recruit the best talent from all over the world, and then self-destruct. Because you now have all sorts of people who live there, and they don't want to move back to wherever they came from, and and so they get together in little threes and twos, and they make little companies, and that's exactly, in Nortel, the largest company in Canada, self-destructed, and now there's 2,000 little baby Nortels in Nepean. Yeah, so it's a great way. I mean,
well, that's a great place to get technology, no question about it, in early startups. I wanted to just finish off by saying, again, this is a series of money raises if you're trying to create your company, if you're trying to build a large enough company to do an IPO, for example. If you want to take that path, you're going to probably need several rounds, and every time you do a round, you get the next level partners. You get the next level VCs. So you might get a second tier VC for your one round, and then you'll go and get the top tier VCs, and they introduce you to more people, and it just keeps building and building till you're ready to do your IPO or get taken out of the market by an acquisition in the meantime.
Christine took away my next question. The question was, the grass always looks greener, and in the case of upstate New York, it is. When it comes to follow-on investment, Ron and George, do you have any other suggestions on finding the next level of investment outside of your comfort zone?
Sure. Well, I mean, Christine is completely right that the center of venture capital is Silicon Valley still, okay, in terms of, quarterly annual investment, followed by the New York metro area, followed by Boston, and then followed by New York. And New York is really coming up. That is the vast majority of real venture money, the billions and billions of dollars that are invested annually. And that's where you're going to find most of the firms. Now, I have been arguing, barking, talking to anybody who wants to listen about, the issue about economic development in Western New York, because I'm passionate about where I live. And the model is really what George just said. You got to have a big company. If you want to look at Silicon Valley, you look at Stanford and look at Hewlett-Packard, and all of a sudden you have apples. And that's what happens. And you got a lot of baby apples running around. So, and why then did venture dollars, venture capital firms grow up there? Because that's where the deal flow was. Okay, you had all these bright people coming out of Stanford. You have all these expatriates coming out of Hewlett-Packard and saying, I'll do it better and I'll do it faster or cheaper, and so you end up creating, I have said now for a while that, you know, a venture base in Western New York or upstate New York or anywhere that's not, you know, Silicon Valley, New York, or Boston, happens because the deal flow happens there. And first they'll come in an airplane to do a deal, and then they'll come and they'll put a tent here if there's enough deals, and then they'll start building buildings, and they're going to be here. Why? Because they go where deal flow is. Now, when we raised money, I raised money from 2 New York venture firms. And why did I get money from New York? Because I went there. I went there with a good business plan. I went there with a solid start in the business, and we got onto that bandwagon. And I was fortunate enough to establish enough credibility in the business that we were building and succeeding that it wasn't all that hard to get audience thereafter. You know, if in fact that you start out with angel dollars and you want to end up finding yourself with a $2, $3, $4, $5 million raise as a real A round or maybe a B round, you know, depending upon what your vernacular is, you're gonna have to get into the larger check writer, you know, areas. And even as all the well-intended, you know, efforts are in upstate New York, it's very hard to put together a $5 to $10 million round here, if that's what you happen to need, you know. I mean, if you're going to build a chip company, you're going to need it, you know. I mean, if you want to do a pizzeria, you can probably get by with a lot less, you know, and that's where you're going to have to go. And again, in order to go there, you better really generate an awful lot of energy out of, you always have to create a new line of credibility with each deployment of capital. So if you have an angel round, you better find that you're ending up putting a lot of distance between when you took the money and when you want to need some new money in terms of what you've accomplished, because you've got to show acceleration in terms of the return on those invested dollars. If you do that, you are credible. If you put together a solid team and you have access, which is what I said in my earlier remarks, then I think you got a shot, but you got to go to where the money is.
Another question I had was not so much the money, but another resource that early stage companies need, and that's an appropriate, robust team. And in upstate New York and in some of the, I imagine, the non-Silicon Valleys of Canada, that's sometimes a challenge. Getting the best VPs you can get. I mean, you've got your buddies when you first start off as a founder, and maybe even the new CEO. I mean, how do you answer to that challenge?
Yeah, well, I think there's, in Toronto, I run life science companies, not IT companies. Actually, I did, one of mine was an IT company, a .com company. Quite literally a .com company.
You need a lot of money for life science.
Life sciences need a lot of money, that's right. And so, and fortunately, the talent pool is pretty thick in Toronto, because it's probably, besides, you know, I think it's the 3rd biggest health sciences cluster in North America or something like that. We've got, you know, just through circumstance or whatever, all the hospitals all got built right downtown. So we have this, you know, 10 hospitals all in the same square block, which happens to be right beside the university. So there's a lot of, and there's a big program there called MARS, which integrates all that stuff and gets everybody connected. And so we have this large government-funded program to get the connectivity going. Mm-hmm. So if there's somebody around, it's not that hard to find them, right? Because Toronto is fairly well connected. That being said, there aren't a lot of experienced operational senior people in Canada. And so a lot of companies have, when they get to the B round or the, you know, 10 or 20 million bucks, I always say you get the CEO you can afford. So if you don't have a lot of money, you don't necessarily get the best CEO. And as you move up and you have more money, then you probably should get a better CEO. And as I think Catherine was saying earlier, you know, you have to do a deal. If you're going to, investors are now looking at management and saying, okay, you're good to here, but then you've got to go, and I need to know now that you're going to go, and I'm not going to have this battle with you later because you're, you know, so that being said, you know, I spent over a year and a half trying to find somebody to be the CEO of the company I just left. Couldn't find anybody in Canada. I finally found somebody in San Francisco and hired him. I gave him 6 months of interfacing, and now he's the CEO and I'm not. So I couldn't find anybody in Canada that was capable of running my company. So, yeah, it's not
You
easy.
got to import.
I had to import it.
I'd love to answer this question. This was a huge problem for me. And in fact, that's why really one of the reasons we got the Greater Rochester Enterprise going was that one of the biggest challenges I did have was getting talented senior level managers to move to upstate New York. And one of my business associates, Larry Peckham, had the same problem. He ended up having to put an operation in Dallas, and I had to put an operation in Fremont, California, because we just couldn't get the people to move to this region. And that's one of the reasons we've been passionate about, let's get this place jump-started so that we can keep people here, keep businesses here. And again, I'm thrilled to see all this activity because it does feel like it's starting to come together. But it is critical to get the people that have experience. We have in this region wonderful talent coming out of our universities, and I always felt that was my secret weapon, that I had the just tremendous raw talent coming in. But when you're trying to compete on a global basis, you got to have some managers who've been there, done it before, who can. We can't afford to make too many mistakes or we will get behind the competition. And so this is a real partnership with the entrepreneurship community as well as the general community. Make this upstate area a great place to be so that we can recruit people to the region.
Well, I think this is maybe the most critical question that we're going to likely talk about, because again, in my earlier comments, it was, that we'll bet on people probably more than ideas, all right? And there's a reason for that, because it works. If I did anything, I either, again, was lucky or I was smart, but I was fortunate enough to surround myself with exceptional people to help me build a business. And I can't say enough about it. What you have to do early on is you have to sell your idea. You have to sell your passion and your idea to somebody who wants to partner with you. Now that means that you're going to share. I want you to come in and I want you to help me build. So typically, if in fact that we find CEOs that are not the founding entrepreneur, they're going to end up with 5 or 10% of the company, and they're not doing it, honestly, for a payroll, for a paycheck, because many of these people are going to take a pay cut in order to take on this assignment. They're doing it because they believe in the opportunity, and they're looking at the value of the equity as being, the real value in the deal, and it's not described in an annual paycheck. I mean, they can't starve to death, so you got to be sensitive to that. I would also suggest that as soon as you can possibly do it, the first level is finding the people that will share your passion and agree with you on the value proposition. I will build that with you, and this person has some capability. The second thing is, and as soon as you can, I am a fan of professional recruiting. And I know it's expensive, but I will tell you right now is that you're busy doing the stuff that you wake up every day to go and do, which is trying to build your company. Everybody leaves the idea of competent recruiting into some sort of second-tier function, but it may be the most important thing you do early on. The great analogy that I use when I talk to other entrepreneurs is professional football. And if you'll indulge me on this for just a second. If you think about a professional football team, I think we would all agree that a professional football team would really kick the snot out of a high school team or a college team. There's more talent and there's better organization. Think about what happens in professional football. What position in a professional football team can be a weak position? Okay, so I won't forget this, none of them. Okay, why? Because the bad guys are up there looking and they say, this guy's running slow, this guy's got a limp, run over him, okay? And that's what happens. So how do you do that? You're recruiting nonstop and you're training nonstop. What are the key positions besides the players? Coaches and recruiters, and that's how you have to view your business. You are building a sleek professional organization that does not have room, if you're playing in the big leagues, for players that somebody's going to say we can run over them. And who's going to run over you? Your competition. So I am absolutely a fan of building a team that is, and unfortunately, everybody that you're going to hire is not going to succeed. And yes, you are going to have to fire people, and I'm sorry, that's a fact of life. But recruit real well, make sure you know how to measure people's performance, and try to get to professional recruiting to help you, because I know you're going to be busy as soon as you possibly can.
The challenge I have in my portfolio companies, as I try to build them out, is finding that way. Challenge is that I see as I wander around, particularly because I work with the cats around the state, is I find technologies and how do I build a team around them? How do I build a company around them? And that goes to the challenge of finding the right people for the right opportunities. Lastly, the question I had is, if you had a magic wand, what sort of changes, what sort of improvements would you create in your regions, in your environments, to promote and support early stage companies?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and don't worry, I'm the only guy from the state here, and I don't remember.
What would I do in my environment to make early stage companies go? Well, we've tried a lot of things lately. We tried public venture capital, sort of a Canadian oxymoron, where we actually, incentivize your average person to invest in venture capital funds, and we grew up a whole bunch of them. And of course, they did a silly thing by putting pacing requirements on them, so they had to invest. So they invested in a whole lot of things that they shouldn't have invested in. And when I was part of the venture capital world, I mean, we used to say it takes about $20 or $30 million to train a venture capitalist. So, what we did, can you, so that's an example of what you shouldn't do, right? You shouldn't take $1 billion and train and use it to train 100 new venture capitalists, only to find out that there's no money for them to be a venture capitalist now that they actually know how to be a venture capitalist. So all those people who were trained to be venture capitalists left, went to the States. They're down here because there's some money down here. Okay. I think we need to, you could probably get public venture capital to work again, but don't put pacing requirements on a thing. So I think that was worth trying again. I mean, in Canada, they've been trying to we have these flow-through shares, tax flow-through shares, which are used in mining and forestry, and people have always been trying to get, and that's why Canada funds 80% of the mining companies in the world, because we had this tax-efficient flow-through share business. So basically, if you had a lot of money and you wanted to put it in a public company, this was just, you basically got most of it back through the tax system. It worked really well. Of course, cost the government a fortune because it worked so well. And so they're not about to let any other kind of company do that. so I guess part of what we've been, and then we went through a cycle of giving universities small amounts of venture capital funds to see whether they could start up a whole bunch of companies and get going, and that didn't work out either. So I don't think it's an easy answer. I mean, I think that you need, I'm with Ron, you need good management, and good management will find a way to find the money to make the business happen. And I think it's a real shame in Canada that we did end up with a whole lot of people who knew how to pick how to structure and pick investment and how to mentor an entrepreneur and turn it into something. But when they were fully trained, we didn't have any money for them to do. Yeah.
Well, sure, I'll go next. I believe that we're beginning to put the infrastructure in place to be helpful to entrepreneurs in this upstate region, and I think that is critical to help the entrepreneurs, many of whom are technologists, understand there's a big difference between a project and an invention and a business, and that to build a business, you have to actually have someone buy the product. And we have a lot of inventions and a lot of new businesses that are so-called new businesses, which really are pet projects. And so we have to build, I think, in all of the communities in this area, sort of some expectation of what it is that we're looking for as the venture capitalists, for example, and that there are deals with milestones milestones, and people have boards, and they have targets that they're meeting, and I call it the business rhythm, which most of the deals, many of the deals I look at are not set up that way. There's not the expectation in their minds, the entrepreneurs, that they're going to be measured regularly, monthly, in what I call the business rhythm. So I think more education on the side of what those expectations are would be beneficial. Then on the flip side of that, on the investor side, that we have those expectations and we make sure we give the tough love to the entrepreneurs and say, hey, we have the expectations. You're going to achieve some revenue, or you're going to be cash flow positive by a certain time, and they're going to be we're going to phase gate your funding based on certain your ability to achieve these goals. A lot of the deals I've seen in this upstate region over the last 10 years have not had some of that discipline, and I think what the result is that you don't succeed, or you don't succeed as quickly. So I think on both sides we can be helpful.
This might be depressing. If you work backwards from exits, because you have to start out with track records. You know, if we want a larger investor base in Western New York, we have to have a track record that, you know, generates the deal flows and the entrepreneurs that have succeeded in order to warrant that investment. You know, by the way, I'm all for all the early stage stuff. You know, all of the angel networks that are out there. You know, the thing that really does concern me, however, is that, you know, when I find a lot of my friends, okay, my community friends that have made some money in their businesses, and they're now, you know, getting very involved in early stage investing. If we really get down to, again, attribution and track record, you know, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more of a red-faced conversation, because, you know, they're sitting there saying, oh, it's pretty tough, you know, we don't have any exits, and so forth and so on. And what this really means is that this idea about building great companies, it's not a cookie cutter process. You know, it's really a very, very much of a long shot in order to have that kind of success. And, you know, unfortunately, when you start with exits and work your way back, if you think about the IPO as being maybe, you know, one of the pinnacles of exits, if you look at IPOs, notwithstanding within a specific vertical that might be technology, just look at all IPOs. You can count them on your hands. You might need a foot or two in order to do it, but that's about what you have during the course of a year. And if you go back and you look at other exits between $100 and $500 million, you know, and rank those and number them, and then between $50 and $100 million, and 25 and 50, you're going to find that the aggregate exits rank in the hundreds, not in the thousands, but in the hundreds in the country, with all due respect to my Canadian friend here, but in the country, and the average is, you know, somewhere around $20 million. Now, just do the regression analysis in terms of invested cash and what the required return is for a 5 or a 7-year investment, and you get an idea whether that's working or not, okay? And you're going to find that's a challenging thing, you know, so unfortunately, everybody is not entitled to succeed in this game. You know, now, you know, we're all so optimistic in nature, and I'm at the top of that pile, that I'd love to see all of these early stage angel networks, you know, try to find some success. But to be honest with you, success is a very hard thing to find, but that is the metric where the returns engine comes from, and that's really what drives the invested capital. So you really can't get away with that. I just want you to also just contemplate for a second that there are, the last time I looked from the National Venture Capital Association, there's something between 3,000 and 4,000 people that call themselves venture capitalists, okay? And that could be anything from somebody who works in a large firm to people that work in various small firms. Probably take that number and double it or triple it in order to kind of figure out how many angels there are out there. Now, if they all just do 1 or 2 deals a year, which is what they will do, 1 or 2 deals a year, you know, you're talking about somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 deals a year, you know, that get done. but I can promise you that there aren't 4,000 and 8,000 exits a year. So that model, unfortunately, I believe that the thing that's not happening today in venture capital is there is way too much money in venture. And therefore, the need to do deals that are not globally competitive and really unique, and can, quote unquote, change the world, they're getting done. And that is paralyzing ongoing investment, although it's been stable, but ongoing investment. So anyhow, what do? I think you need unbelievable deal flow. And I think that the best way you do that is to have unbelievable producers of deals. And I would look to, in Western New York, to the University at Buffalo to be able to bring in rock stars in various disciplines that can do things that can change the world. Because we need to build, the Nortel, and hopefully they don't die, or the Hewlett-Packard in Western New York, that does not get to be a $100 million company and then sell to somebody outside of the state. But I would look at the deal generation side, and I would like to invest in the education process to be able to bring in the very talented at the top of the heap, because those people will do interesting things.
And with that optimistic view of the world.
But I am an optimist.
But it's true as it is. I want to thank my panelists. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did. And I'll turn it over to Marnie to continue this event. Thank you very much, everybody. They don't have mics around.
Thanks to all of our panelists. We actually are just going to take about a 5-minute break to reset the stage, and then we have our rapid-fire 1-minute company pitches. Anyone interested in the 4:30 tour of the gallery, they are still offering that. We have a group signed up. We just need to have you sign up by the registration desk, Jeff. Is that correct? Very good. And the raffle for the laptop will be done right before the tour, and then you can head out. But please join us back here. Let's see. 4:05, we're going to say, and get our rapid fire 1 minute done. So all the companies for that session, please line up.